Hello, I'm Dr. Blanco Cadena, and on behalf of my co-authors, I'm here to present our work on the main factors that can be identified in the built environment, which influence the way a slow onset disaster develops. In particular, the characteristics of the Italian built environment that have been studied in this work. Okay, but before starting, it's important to give some context on the subject. Resilience has also been used in climate change challenges and mitigation strategies. Additionally, but rather recently, on the way the built environment is expected to behave in case of significant environmental stress. Growing interest is supported by the increased number of people living in urban areas. In this context, resilience is normally dealt at the scale of cities, and sufficient evidence is found on the efforts made by authorities and institutions to prevent disturbances. However, the rate at which disasters arise has grown in the past few years and requires further research to avoid vast disasters. Dealing with these issues is not easy. Urbanized areas, due to their complexity, are contemporarily and recurrently exposed to rapid and slow events. These are SWOTs, or sudden onset disaster events. Some of them are earthquake, floods, or hurricanes. And also they are subjected to SLODs, or slow onset disaster events. Some of them, for example, structural and industrial transformation, economic recessions, and environmental degradation. Most studies have proposed resilience for adapting to these events, but normally they are regarded as globally as climate change. However, in the case of SLODs, few have assessed these issues, proposing resilience as a solution, or proposing resilience as part of mitigation strategies, or doing a deep and detailed analysis. In addition, scientific proof has strongly related BE or built environment features to worsen experience with SLODs events within urban areas. In fact, some evidence are urban heat island and air quality decay in cities. Thus, this research has concentrated on investigating which characteristics of the built environment boost the negative effects of critical SLODs, such as increasing temperatures and pollutant concentrations. This research is encompassed in the funded research project Be Secure, aiming to improve the knowledge, evaluation, and design of the built environment to deal with the integrated risk of SWOTs and SLODs, to which cities are currently under. Then, to give a little background on the subject, urban heat islands are defined as the fact that in urban areas there is a present and, let's say, recurrent significantly higher air temperature average of around 1 to 2 degrees Celsius compared to urban areas. This comprises both day and night hours, resulting in lower thermal comfort for the citizens, higher thermal stress for them as well, higher energy use for buildings or for, let's say, plant systems in the infrastructure, for cooling mainly, and other consequences. This fact is a result on the rather diffuse surface heat island, or let's say the overall greater surface temperature of the whole built fabric, let's say, or all the, let's say, built surfaces, which contributes to a surge in atmospheric heat island, which is the main, let's say, air temperature perception or feeling. Thus, heat is entrapped within the urban fabric, or let's say within the urban area, which what generates this greater heat entrapment. Well, it is achieved when solar radiation influx and material absorption is promoted, while blocking wind flow, so there is no heat elevation or dissipation. Hence, natural arousal of heat waves have become more frequent and intense due to this phenomena of the UHI. For air pollution, things are a little bit different. In fact, air pollution has this, let's say, this characteristic that the pollutants are also emitted or produced within the urban areas, and they are not only produced but they are also contained, and they are not diluted or transported outside of the urban area. According to the World Health Organization, this represents one of the biggest environmental risks to health. Therefore, it's not an issue to just underestimate. Also, because 91% of the world's population is estimated to live under very poor air quality conditions. Cities nowadays, growing population density and pollutants emission, as we already mentioned, which makes them struggle to maintain proper air quality levels, and they also struggle to, let's say, alleviate or propose strategies or to implement strategies that will be able to mitigate or alleviate these conditions, and even precaution measures for citizens to keep themselves healthy and safe. Furthermore, these conditions are progressively more frequent and more recurrently, they coexist with increasing temperatures, or in other words, more intense urban heat islands and heat waves. The coexistence produces even more pollutants, making the situations a little harder to solve. So let's review a little bit what I just mentioned. So larger air pollution leads to larger, or let's say higher air temperature increase, especially when the pollutants are part of the greenhouse gases. Therefore, how can we deal with this issue? I mean, the more we pollute, the warmer the environment is, but the warmer the environment is, the more plant system we use, and then there's let's say a bad habit of a very cyclic bad habit. Therefore, in this work, we understood that the SLODs have a very strong connection between, or let's say among them. In fact, air pollution and increasing air temperatures are not the only SLODs that have a strong relationship. We started by collecting from the literature, that means mainly the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change reports, a list of what was agreed and established as SLODs, and scouting what their interrelations were or how close they were related one to another. Their interaction or interrelations were based on reported knowledge, on one being the cause or the result of the other. This allowed us to recognize increasing temperatures, air quality, and pollution as those with the more repetitive interaction with others. That means the one that had more connections with the other SLODs, followed by droughts and loss of biodiversity. This encouraged the work to deepen the intrinsic characteristic of urban areas, augmenting air temperature and pollutant concentrations. To do so, we simplified the built environment into urban unit archetypes, especially into a single urban canyon, which, depending on the building heights and the width that separate both edges, could recreate any other urban unit, for instance, a piazza or a courtyard. We single out the parameters that could significantly affect the mesoscale conditions, highlighting that this could change in time as well, depending on the maintenance and degradation of the materials or degradation of the elements itself. All this could be condensed in macro categories, such as urban fabric materiality and geometry, greenery location and coverage, and their degradation, as we already mentioned. Urban fabric materiality will be related to the type of surface materials that you have. Is it opaque? Is it transparent? What is his albedo? Instead, for the greenery, we're talking about either grass, trees, urban forest, and such. There are other parameters that should be taken into account, such as the solar is the solar radiation influx. That's why we're showing here in the image the, let's say, the effect of the sun plus the shadowing effect of the building itself. Also the proximity of the citizen to certain elements such as the traffic intensity as well, the proximity to the green areas, because this will change completely their perception. Afterwards, we decided to put this, let's say, this methodology or this idea or assessment in practice. Therefore, these parameters were surveyed and clustered according to the main forms of a highly dense Italian city, as it is the city of Milan, Lombardy, in Lombardy. Then these shapes were screened qualitatively to understand their criticalities in terms of materiality, so as we already mentioned, albedo, geometry, so height, width, sizes, orientation, aspect ratio, that means height over width of the urban canyon, and where the green area is located, what the coverage is, and the possibility of creating shadows by these green areas, which means, let's say, the possibility of having trees generating these shadows. Studying as well their contribution to, studying as well and in parallel their contribution to mitigate or worsen the mentioned critical SLODs. The result of this screening was that we found two recurrent shapes in the city of Milan, which are Piazza and Piazzale and the urban canyon, that we can also recreate, as we already mentioned, just modifying the h and the w, or the height and the width of the urban canyon itself. The cluster built environment types of Piazzale, Piazza, and urban canyon were studied and compared, varying some of the parameters that compose these archetypes, that is, different aspect ratio of low height over width ratio, very low, or in certain cases high, the presence or not of trees, that means green area presence and coverage, and varying as well the albedo properties of the surface materials from low to high, including average as well. And then we also allocated to certain combination of parameters which slot was most critical for those, let's say, parameter combinations, allocating or giving a severity from 1 to 3, being 1 the lowest and being 3 the highest. The worst conditions were identified for BE or built environment high piazzale with low-rise buildings and average material albedo, even with tree presence, especially for air pollution. Also, a white piazza with low-rise buildings with or without trees and average material albedo. This time, both slots are critical for these conditions. While for the urban canyon, greater number of combinations lead to high severity. So let's say that the conditions are a little bit more specific and they should be studied more in depth, or in separate. They should be studied separately to understand how to assess or how to mitigate or how to alleviate these conditions. Finally, we wanted to estimate how different the mesoscale conditions can be and how much they vary spatially, and validate the quantitative assessment of the urban canyon. That is, a urban canyon was tested in terms of solar radiation influx and surface irradiation to have a notion of how the surface temperatures will be distributed. For instance, in a year in Milan, Italy, an east-to-west oriented canyon with low-rise buildings serving as shadow from the sun, the open space area would provide different conditions, rather cooler conditions from the south, from the shaded area, and a rather warm conditions on the less shaded area towards north. This will modify the way the materials would generate an absorption of the solar radiation, motivating the heat entrapment. Thus, strategies for shadowing can be delivered either with the built fabric or even placing green elements such as trees to provide shaded, cool, or chill spaces inside the canyon. As mentioned at the beginning, the problem is not so easy, and providing shading or shaded areas, it's not the gospel, and it's not the only solution to solve or resolve this complexity of the SLOD event. In fact, wind has a significant role for heat alleviation, but also pollutants dilution or even transport, so it can be either good or bad for our SLOD risk assessment or trying to mitigate or alleviate the SLOD's effect on the citizens. So we took different generic P typologies and couple them in a, let's say, in a larger area, and insert it into a wind tunnel and subject them to an approximate maximum wind speed peak average of 10 meter per square wind, which was reported on Milan's weather file with Milan's EPW weather file. These conditions were tested, these conditions were tested, and all, let's say, high-rise buildings were placed windwards, and generic surface material was allocated. Therefore, every surface included in the model had the same roughness and such. To do a rather more geometrical analysis, the results show rather high speed and pressure concentration at the windward side, while at the leeward part, rather a depression is present and low or no wind speed has been found in those areas. That means as well the pollution absorption or concentration can vary significantly in the urban complex. However, the lower is the wind speed, the lower is the pollutant transportation movement from the source. Therefore, if there's a nearby pollutant source emitter, let's say, we will be safe in a certain way, but because the pollutants will never get to this mesoscale area. But the lower is the wind speed, the lower is the pollution of any pollutants already present in the area or produced in the area, plus there will not be any heat alleviation. Hence, understanding wind dynamics together with the presence of current elements and the solar radiation exposure becomes key to estimate the city's thermal stress on air pollution exposure. Why do we mention this? Because if you look at the image, buildings are not the only ones that are blocking the wind flow or modifying the wind flow within this urban canyon. The presence of green elements can also decrease the wind flow and block, and let's say inhibit their normal course, modifying as well the wind speed, being let's say harmful to any strategy promoting wind speed for heat alleviation and pollutant dispersion. To summarize and conclude, progressive increase in temperatures and air pollution combined with decay of air quality were identified as the most critical SLODs present in urban areas, given their interrelation and their interaction with the rest of the SLODs. These SLODs shall be assessed on a risk evaluation, and when done, this risk evaluation assessment should consider population exposure and the susceptibility of this population, environmental and inherent conditions of the context, environmental hazards, perhaps altitude, perhaps orientation, and solar exposure or sky conditions, and the characteristics of the built environment that would boost or worsen the hazard, therefore incrementing the vulnerability of the space. The risk components of the loss were individuated, dividing them by exposure, hazard, and vulnerability, as we already explained. Such is the connection of the built environment with SLODs that there has been substantial proof that unconscious design of the urban fabric, in fact, favors SLODs and their harmful effects on citizens. On the contrary, informed design decisions can improve or reduce that vulnerability of citizens, and a, a careful or a very measured citizen behavior within the built environment can significantly reduce either the exposure or the vulnerability of the citizens inside the, let's say the urban unit that we're studying, or the urban unit present in the city. Subjective estimation on allocation of the potential risk of SLODs for citizens within a certain portion, that is the urban canyon piazzale that we just mentioned, based on multiple parameters: aspect ratio, tree or green area coverage and presence, and albedo, and orientation, geometry, density, all the ones that we already mentioned, that describe different scenarios, have been carried out and have been allocated into a potential or probability risk of having of SLOD arousal. However, further studies are foreseen and are needed for clarifying the SLOD risk components and quantifying and measuring, and why not measuring, the effects of the presented parameters. In fact, relating to what extent does a certain parameter modify the effect or modify the impact of SLODs, either for increasing temperatures or pollution. I want to thank, on behalf of my co-authors and myself, to the Italian Ministry of Education, which supported this research under the project of Be Secure, and also thanking you for your time and your attention during this presentation. For any other questions or inquiries, here are our contact details if you want to get in touch with us. Thank you once again.